What's up, everybody? Piscean here, bringing you another video. This time, I actually am going to do something very, very different. For someone that loves astrology, loves to talk about it and make videos about it, I haven't yet done a philosophical, psychological, and scientific critique of astrology. So that is what this video is entailing. We may talk about something else if we finish up, but I usually stick to one topic. Now, instead of the Piscean ponders and I swim around and talk about multiple subjects like a podcast. So, from skeptical analysis to archetypal integration, a comprehensive manual for navigating the epistemological landscape of the sidereal arts with appendices, glossary, and conceptual excerpts. Now, before we get started with our preface here, I'd appreciate if you subscribe, like, comment, and share if you dare and care, with peace and love. All right, so astrology stands at a crossroads. For 4,000 years, it has been a revered cosmology, a diagnostic tool, a language of the soul, and a guide to the rhythms of time. Yet, in the modern era, it has been relegated to the margins of intellectual respectability, dismissed as a pseudoscience, a relic of pre-Enlightenment superstition. The faculty of astrology, sciences, does not shy away from this tension. We embrace it as the crucible in which a more rigorous, self-aware, and intellectually honest astrology is being forged. This study guide and video, The Astral Mirror, is not a manual of predictive techniques or natal interpretation. It is an epistemological investigation. It asks the most difficult questions. In what sense, if any, can astrology be considered true? Does it work through causal mechanisms or as a symbolic language of meaning? How does it survive rigorous scientific scrutiny, and what does it mean when it fails? What is the psychological function of astrological belief, and can that function be legitimate even in the absence of demonstrable physical influence? We do not presuppose an answer. We walk the student through the major critical traditions, the skeptical empiricism of the ancient Greeks, the Humean critique of causality, the modern statistical tests, the exposure of cognitive biases, and give them their full weight. We then explore the psychological models of C.G. Jung, James Hillman, and their successors, who reframed astrology not as a science of celestial causation, but as a phenomenology of the psyche, a synchronistic mirror in which the soul reads its own structure. We engage with the philosophy of science, from Popper's falsifiability criterion to Feyerabend's epistemological anarchism, to locate astrology within or beyond the boundaries of scientific method. And we examine the emerging post-skeptical movement, which seeks to integrate the genuine insights of skeptical critique into a reformed, self-critical astrological practice, one that honors its symbolic power while relinquishing unsupportable truth claims. So this video and manual is designed for the advanced student, the critical thinker, and the practitioner who wishes to engage with the intellectual challenges of the craft rather than retreat into dogmatic certainty. It demands a willingness to hold ambiguity, to acknowledge the limits of one's own knowledge, and to pursue truth even when it is uncomfortable. And I'm making this video specifically as a detransition person because if I'm going to sit here and talk about how I've been harmed by the medical industry in such a severe way, I also want to talk about, the two sides to astrology. Like, there's two sides to the gender spectrum, whatever you want to say. I don't really believe that trans people, it's more like, in my opinion, gender nonconformity and homosexuality, repressed homosexuality, and people don't want to just be gender nonconforming. They want to be even more marginalized than gay people. So it's a lot going on in our world. But I believe there's two sides and multiple sides to every story, because that's how this life works. There's no yes or no to every single question. So the faculty believes that in astrology, which has passed through the fire of rigorous critique, emerges not destroyed, but tempered, more honest, more humble, and ultimately more profound. All right. So I'm going to go over our table of contents with you, which I really have been enjoying doing lately, just so I can keep shit in order. So part 1, we're going to go over the foundations of the astrological episteme, the question of truth, astrology's place in the history of knowledge, varieties of astrological claim, causal, symbolic, divinatory, and magical models, the ancient skeptics, Carneades, Cicero, and the problem of twins, the Enlightenment rupture, Hume, Kant, and the demise of celestial causation. In part 2, we're going to go over the psychological model, C.G. Jung and the theory of synchronicity, a causal orderedness, archetypal astrology, the planets as psychic structures, projection, the Barnum effect, and the therapeutic function of astrological narrative, humanistic and transpersonal astrology, from prediction to self-actualization. Part 3, we're going to go over our scientific scrutiny. So the scientific method and the demarcation problem, what makes a science? Key empirical studies, Carlson, 1985, Kwok-Kellen in the meta-analysis, cognitive biases in astrological judgment, confirmation bias, subjective validation, and the Forer effect, statistical and methodological challenges, effect sizes, controls, and replication. Part 4, we're going to go over philosophical integration, falsifiability and its discontents, Popper, Kuhn, and Feyerabend on astrology. Astrology as a hermeneutic discipline, meaning over mechanism, phenomenology of the horoscope, the lived experience of astrological truth, embodied and inactive approaches, astrology as a cognitive technology. Part 5, we're going to go over toward a post-skeptical astrology, integrating the skeptical critique, what astrology must relinquish, informed consent and ethical communication of astrological information, the alpha generation and the future of astrological epistemology, and the NHI perspective, Ariel on truth, symbol, and the galactic library. We're going to have our appendices A through G, glossary of epistemological and critical terms, annotated bibliography of key texts, pro and anti-astrology, detailed summaries of major empirical studies, cognitive bias checklists for the practicing astrologer, philosophical thought experiments and discussion questions, sample case studies and post-skeptical counseling, and faculty certification in astrological epistemology, which is also something new I've been doing a lot. Sometimes I'll talk about it, other videos I don't, but in these study guides, that's what you're going to see is this format. So, let's talk about our foundations of the astrological episteme, specifically the question of truth. Astrology's place in the history of knowledge. Astrology is not one thing. It has been, at various times and in various cultures, a branch of natural philosophy, a medical diagnostic system, a priestly divinatory art, a folk practice, and a psychological tool. To ask, is astrology true, is thus to ask an ill-formed question, akin to asking, is medicine true, or is art true? The first task of the critical student is to clarify what kind of truth claim a given astrological statement makes. We can distinguish at least 4 overlapping epistemological modes in the history of astrology. The causal physical model, natural astrology. So the planets and stars, through their light, heat, gravity, or some subtle emanation, exert a direct influence on terrestrial events and human biology. And this was the dominant model from Ptolemy through the Renaissance, and it grounds medical astrology in particular. In this model, astrology is an empirical science, imperfect but corrigible, of celestial influences. Scientific criticism has largely dismantled the physical basis of this model, though some researchers, for example the Kwok-Kellens, sought evidence of planetary effects. The symbolic hermeneutic model, or judicial astrology. The celestial configurations are not causes, but signs, a cosmic text to be interpreted. This model is agnostic about mechanism. It asserts a correspondence between macrocosm and microcosm that is intelligible to the trained reader. This is the dominant model in modern psychological and archetypal astrology. The divinatory model, all right? Horary and electional astrology. So chart cast for the moment of question or an action is a direct means of accessing non-local information, often understood as mediated by divine or spiritual agency. In this model, astrology is a form of mantic practice, akin to the I Ching or tarot. Its validity depends not on causal laws, but on the reliability of the divinatory protocol. The magical participatory model, astrological magic. So the planets are living intelligences with whom the practitioner enters into ritual relationship. The chart is a map of spiritual forces that can be invoked, propitiated, or aligned with. This model is common in esoteric traditions and is making a resurgence in contemporary astrological animism. The faculty does not enforce a single model, demands that the student be conscious of which model they are operating within at any given time and that they refrain from making causal claims when operating in a symbolic or divinatory mode. Much of the confusion and acrimony in the astrology science debate arises from the conflation of these distinct epistemological stances. When a client asks, "Will I get the job?" and you cast a horary chart, you are not measuring a physical force emanating from Jupiter. You are entering a divinatory field. Jupiter's position is a sign, not a cause. To present it as causal is to invite justified ridicule from the physicist. To present it as a meaningful sign within a disciplined interpretive tradition is to operate within a different and perfectly valid human rationality. You should know your mode, name your mode, and never confuse them. Varieties of astrological claim: causal, symbolic, divinatory, and magical models. So this module expands the taxonomy introduced in 1.1. The student must learn to identify the implicit epistemology in any astrological text or statement. A newspaper horoscope, for example, typically operates in a degraded causal symbolic hybrid mode, making vague claims that are often better explained by the Forer effect, and we'll learn about this in Module 3.3. But when I say newspaper horoscope, I mean you know your sun sign. Oh, I'm a sun in Gemini, you know, your pop astrology. And yeah. So a natal consultation that interprets a Saturn transit as a time of necessary contraction and learning operates in a symbolic mode that may be validated by the client's experience without requiring a causal mechanism. The student is asked to analyze excerpts from classic and modern astrologers Ptolemy, Lilly, Rudar, Green, and classify each statement according to the four models. This exercise cultivates epistemological self-awareness. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. The ancient skeptics, Carneades, Cicero, and the problem of twins. The critique of astrology is as old as astrology itself. In the 2nd century BCE, the academic skeptic Carneades formulated a series of devastating arguments against Stoic astrological determinism, which are preserved in Cicero's De Divinatione. The most famous is the problem of twins. Two individuals, born at the same moment, under the same stars, yet with radically different fates. If astrology's causal claims are true, this should be impossible. The Stoics responded with various ad hoc adjustments, but the logical force of the argument remains potent. Carneades also raised the problem of the diversity of human fates at a single moment. So, for example, a battle where many die, or each with a different natal chart. The variability of astrologers' predictions and the implausibility of distant stars affecting a newborn more than the warmth of the birthing room. The student must engage directly with these ancient critiques, not as historical curiosities, but as living challenges that every astrologer must address. The modern psychological astrologer may respond by retreating from the strong causal claim, but then must explain in what sense the chart is meaningful at all. Can the problem of twins be resolved within a symbolic or divinatory model of astrology? And if so, How? If not, what does this imply about the limits of astrological knowledge? Just a discussion question here. Sarah DQ, Dairy Queen, not sponsored. I don't even eat there. Alright, so the Enlightenment rupture, Hume, Kant, and the demise of celestial causation. The scientific revolution of the 17th century, culminating in Newtonian mechanics, dismantled the Aristotelian Ptolemaic cosmos that had provided the physical framework for astrology. The planets were no longer divine intelligences moving in crystalline spheres, but inert masses governed by universal gravitation. Any claim of celestial influence on human affairs now required a physical mechanism, and none was forthcoming. David Hume, in an inquiry concerning human understanding, 1748, delivered a philosophical blow that remains relevant. He argued that all causal reasoning is based on constant conjunction observed in experience. Meaning, we have no experience of the planets causing terrestrial events. We have only a tradition of asserted correlations, often based on anecdote and confirmation bias. Astrology, by Hume's criteria, fails to establish causality. Immanuel Kant, who had a complex relationship with astrology, distinguished between the phenomenal world, the world as it appears to us, governed by deterministic laws, and the noumenal world, the world as it is in itself, inaccessible to science. Some later defenders of astrology have located its validity in the noumenal realm, as a symbolic reflection of a deeper order that science cannot grasp. This move, while philosophically interesting, abandons any claim to empirical verification. The student must understand that the Enlightenment critique is not a passing annoyance, but a permanent condition of modern astrological practice. Any intellectually honest astrology must take it into account. On to part 2, which is a psychological model. A causal orderedness, or Carl Jung, and the theory of synchronicity, which has been talked about a bit in history. Like everything else, it's like when you're Gen Z and Alpha, what do we have? We have hormone replacement to get us cancer early so we die faster. Like, that's the world we're living in. So Carl Jung is the single most important figure in the rehabilitation of astrology for the modern mind. His concept of synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence of an inner psychic state in an outer event, without causal connection, provided a philosophical framework in which astrological correspondences could be understood without requiring physical influence. Jung's own astrological investigations included a statistical study of marriage charts, in which he found a significant excess of certain aspects. So notably, he saw sun-moon conjunctions between the charts of married couples. While this study has been criticized on methodological grounds, its significance lies less in the data than in the paradigm it proposed. Astrology, as a branch of the study of synchronicity, a form of a causal orderedness that reveals the underlying unity of psyche and cosmos. In a famous letter to Freud, Jung wrote of the peculiar principle underlying astrology, which he later identified as synchronicity. He saw the natal chart not as a cause of personality, but as a symbolic reflection of the individual's psychic structure at the moment of birth, a kind of cosmic Rorschach test that could be read for psychological insight. The faculty teaches Jung's model not as the final word, but as a crucial transition. It allows the astrologer to work meaningfully with charts while remaining agnostic about causal mechanisms. It shifts the locus of truth from the external world to the internal coherence of the symbolic system and its resonance with lived experience. Alright. Archetypal astrology. And these are the planets as psychic structures. While building on Jung's work, The archetypal astrologers, particularly Dane Rudar, Liz Green, and Richard Tarnas, developed a sophisticated psychological model in which the planets represent fundamental archetypes of the collective unconscious. Saturn is not a ringed planet causing restriction. Saturn is the archetypal planet, it's the archetypal principle of structure, limitation, and maturation, which manifests simultaneously in the cosmos and culture and in the individual psyche. In this model, a Saturn transit does not cause hardship. It synchronistically coincides with a period of life when the Saturn archetype is constellated in the individual psyche. The astrologer's task is to interpret the archetypal pattern and help the client navigate its expression consciously. So, Richard Tarnas, and his book, Cosmos and Psyche from 2006, excuse me, he basically presented a comprehensive case for archetypal astrology, documenting correlations between planetary alignments and major historical events, artistic movements, and the biographies of key figures. He explicitly adopts a participatory epistemology. The observer and the observed co-create the phenomenon, and this is a sophisticated philosophical position. But it requires abandoning the ambition to prove astrology by objective, third-person methods. The student must learn the archetypal vocabulary and apply it to natal and transit interpretation. They must also learn the limits. Archetypal astrology cannot predict specific events, only the quality of the time. This is both its strength and its frustration for those seeking concrete answers. Holy shit, I am stoned. Oh my gosh, I'm not giving weed a good name. People are gonna be like, oh my god, this is how you act when you smoke weed. You gotta stop smoking. Well, fuck you. That's what I say. Suck my clit. So, projection, the Barnum effect, and the therapeutic function of astrological narrative. A robust psychological model of astrology must account for the well-documented cognitive phenomena that can generate spurious validation. The Barnum effect, or Forer effect, is a tendency of individuals to accept vague, general personality descriptions as uniquely applicable to themselves. Classic experiments by Bertram Forer, 1948, demonstrated that people will rate a generic personality sketch as highly accurate when they believe it was tailored to them. So, does the Barnum effect explain all of astrology? Well, critics argue that it does. Astrologers respond that the Barnum effect is real and must be guarded against, but that it does not account for highly specific predictions that come true or for the repeated correlations found in some statistical studies. A more nuanced psychological perspective acknowledges that astrological consultation can have genuine therapeutic value even if the underlying cosmic claims are false. The chart provides a structured narrative framework that helps clients reflect on their lives, gain perspective, and feel a sense of coherence and meaning. This is not scientific in the causal sense, but it is a legitimate function of any symbolic system, from dream analysis to narrative therapy. The ethical astrologer, trained in this faculty, learns to distinguish between the therapeutic use of astrological symbolism and the making of unfounded factual claims. They say this transit often correlates with a period of introspection and reassessment, not Saturn is causing your depression. All right. From prediction to self-actualization, and this is big for me, humanistic and transpersonal astrology. Dane Rudar's The Astrology of Personality. This came out in 1936. It was a watershed, explicitly integrating Jungian psychology with astrology and reorienting the practice from prediction to self-actualization. In Rudar's vision, the natal chart is a map of the soul's potential and the transits are invitations to growth. The goal is not to beat the stars, but to consciously participate in one's own evolution. This humanistic turn has dominated modern Western astrology. It aligns with the broader cultural shift towards psychotherapy, self-help, and personal development. It also makes astrology more palatable to a scientifically skeptical I can't even talk. It also makes astrology more palatable to a scientifically skeptical public. One need not believe in celestial causation to find value in a system that helps one reflect on one's life patterns. Excuse me. So the student of this faculty is trained in humanistic chart interpretation, learning to frame every configuration in terms of potential challenge and growth. They also learn the transpersonal dimension, the connection of the individual psyche to the collective unconscious and the cosmic whole. This is the territory where astrology shades into spirituality, and where the language of archetypes intersects with the language of the sacred. Scientific scrutiny. The scientific method and the demarcation problem. What makes a science? The question, is astrology a science, depends on what one means by science. The philosophical problem of demarcation. Distinguishing science from non-science has been debated for a century. Karl Popper proposed falsifiability as a criterion. A theory is scientific if it makes risky predictions that could in principle be shown false. Astrology, critics argue, fails this test because its practitioners routinely explain away failed predictions through ad hoc modifications. The chart manifested psychologically, not literally. Thomas Kuhn, in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which came out in 1962, proposed a different model. Science operates within paradigms, which are constellations of theories, methods, and assumptions. Astrology was once a paradigm within natural philosophy. It was displaced by the Newtonian paradigm. It persists not because it is scientific by modern standards, but because it serves functions: psychological, spiritual, community building, that the dominant paradigm does not fully address. Paul Feyerabend, the anarchist philosopher of science, argued in Against Method, 1975, that there is no single scientific method and that the demarcation between science and non-science is often a political boundary. He explicitly defended astrology as a legitimate form of knowledge that had been unjustly marginalized. The student must engage with these philosophical debates and form their own considered position. The faculty does not require adherence to any single demarcation criterion, but it demands that the student be able to articulate their epistemological stance and defend it against criticism. All right. Key empirical studies. The most famous modern test of astrology was conducted by physicist Sean Carlson and published in Nature in 1985. Carlson, working with a panel of astrologers, designed a double-blind experiment. Astrologers attempted to match natal charts to psychological profiles. The result was a null finding. The astrologers performed no better than Jan's. The study is widely cited as a definitive refutation of astrological claims. However, this study has been criticized by astrologers on methodological grounds. The astrologers who were not allowed to interview clients, the psychological tests used, the CPI, may not capture the dimensions astrology describes, and the astrologers' preferred methods were constrained. These critiques are plausible but do not overturn the fundamental challenge. In a controlled setting, astrologers failed to demonstrate the skill they claim. Michel and Verschois Gauquelin conducted extensive statistical studies from the 1950s onward, finding correlations between planetary positions at birth and professional success. The Mars effect for sports champions. Reanalysis by skeptics yielded mixed results, and the controversy remains unresolved. The Gauquelin's work is a reminder that the empirical case is not entirely one-sided, even if the overall weight of evidence favors the skeptical position. Meta-analysis of astrological studies generally conclude that the evidence for astrological claims is weak to non-existent. The student must read these studies, understand their methodology, and honestly confront the results. Let's talk about cognitive biases in astrological judgment. Confirmation bias, objective validation, and the Forer effect. Even if there is no objective astrological effect, people, including trained astrologers, can genuinely feel that astrology works. This feeling is produced by a suite of well-understood cognitive biases. confirmation bias, right? It's the tendency to notice and remember information that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs and to ignore or discount disconfirming information. An astrologer remembers the accurate transit interpretations and forgets the misses. Subjective validation, Forer effect. The acceptance of vague descriptions as personally accurate. Illusory correlation, perceiving a relationship between variables when none exists. Hindsight bias, after an event, believing that one could have predicted it. I knew that Saturn transit would bring trouble, for example. So, the faculty requires every student to undergo training in cognitive debiasing. This does not require abandoning astrological practice, but it does require a rigorous self-skepticism. The astrologer keeps a log of predictions and checks them against outcomes. They learn to recognize the Barnum effect in their own interpretations. They invite feedback from clients about what did not resonate. Right. Statistical and methodological challenges, effect sizes, controls, and replication. So, even if an astrological effect exists, it may be small, so small that large sample sizes are required to detect it and easily swamped by noise. The astrological research community has not consistently employed the rigorous statistical standards now demanded in psychology and medicine, so here's what our issues include. Multiple comparisons. With many planets, signs, houses, and aspects, the probability of finding some significant correlation by chance is high if corrections are not applied. Publication bias. Studies with positive results are more likely to be published than null results. Lack of pre-registration. I'm so tired, I haven't slept in a few days. Researchers can consciously or unconsciously alter their hypothesis after seeing the data. I'm probably going to sleep after this video for sure. The student must understand these challenges and learn the basics of statistical reasoning. Even if they never conduct formal research, they must be able to critically evaluate the research they encounter. Alright, part 4 is our philosophical integration. We're going to talk about falsifiability and its discontents. A deeper dive into the philosophy of science. So, Popper explicitly used astrology as an example of a pseudoscience because it failed his falsifiability criterion. Astrologers respond that good astrological practice does make falsifiable predictions. So, for example, like Mars transiting the 7th house will correlate with increased conflict in partnerships, but that these predictions are probabilistic rather than deterministic. Popperians counter that unless the predictions are precise and risky, they are not genuinely testable. Kuhn's paradigm theory suggests that the perceived failure of astrology is not due to a definitive experiment, but to a shift in the dominant paradigm. Astrology lost its scientific status when the Aristotelian cosmos was replaced by the Newtonian one, not because of any single test. This suggests that astrology could theoretically be reintegrated into a future paradigm that accommodates synchronicity, non-local consciousness, or other post-materialist concepts. Feyerabend radicalized this. He argued that the suppression of astrology by modern science is an act of intellectual imperialism, and that a free society should allow multiple epistemologies to coexist. While controversial, his perspective is valuable for understanding the cultural politics of the astrology science debate. Astrology as a hermeneutic discipline, meaning over mechanism. Hermeneutics is a theory of interpretation. In this model, astrology is not about causal explanation, but about understanding. The chart is a text, and the astrologer is an interpreter. The validity of an interpretation is judged not by its correspondence to an external fact, but by its coherence, depth, and resonance with the client's lived experience. This model aligns astrology with disciplines like literary criticism, psychoanalysis, and religious studies. It does not claim to be a science. It claims to be a humanistic art of meaning-making. This is a perfectly defensible position, and many contemporary astrologers implicitly operate within it. The student must learn to articulate this position clearly and to distinguish it from causal claims that would require scientific proof. Phenomenology of the horoscope, the lived experience of astrological truth. Phenomenology, the philosophical study of lived experience, offers another avenue. Instead of asking, is astrology objectively true? The phenomenologist asks, what is the experience of finding astrological meaning like? What does it reveal about the structure of human consciousness? For the client, a resonant reading can feel profoundly true, illuminating, and transformative. This experiential truth is not reducible to objective verification. It is a different kind of truth, subjective, existential, therapeutic. The phenomenologist takes this experience seriously without needing to validate it externally. The student is invited to conduct a phenomenological self-study, to journal their own experience of a transit or a natal reading, to bracket their prior beliefs, and to describe the experience as fully as possible. This exercise cultivates a non-dogmatic, open-minded engagement with the astrological phenomenon. Embodied and inactive approaches. Astrology as a cognitive technology. Recent work in cognitive science and philosophy of mind suggests that cognition is not just in the brain, but it is embodied, situated, and extended into the environment. Some scholars have proposed that astrology functions as a cognitive technology, an external symbolic system that scaffolds human self-understanding. The natal chart in this view is a tool for thinking about one's life, relationships, and timing. This approach does not require the planets to exert any influence. The chart is a structured representation that helps the user organize their experience and gain perspective. Much like a calendar, a clock, or a map, the question then becomes not, is astrology true, but is astrology useful? For whom? Under what circumstances? This pragmatic turn is appealing to many scientifically minded practitioners. It allows them to continue using astrological techniques while remaining agnostic about cosmic mechanisms. Right, part 5 is toward a post-skeptical astrology. Integrating the skeptical critique, what astrology must relinquish. So the faculty believes that an intellectually honest astrology must make the following concessions. No physical causal mechanism has been established. Claims of celestial influence should be reframed as symbolic correlations or synchronistic phenomena. Astrology cannot make highly specific falsifiable predictions with consistent accuracy. It is more reliable at describing qualities of time than specific events. The Barnum effect and cognitive biases are real and pervasive. Every astrologer must engage in ongoing self-scrutiny. Astrology does not replace medical, financial, or legal advice. It is a complementary, not an alternative system. Astrology's value is primarily psychological, spiritual, and hermeneutic. It helps people find meaning and navigate life transitions. So these concessions do not destroy astrology, they refine it. They protect clients from harm and the discipline from justified ridicule. Informed consent and ethical communication of astrological information. While the astrologer trained in this faculty is bound by an ethic of informed consent before reading, the client is informed of the model the astrologer uses. For example, I practice archetypal astrology, which is a symbolic language, not a scientific prediction system. That astrological interpretations are probabilistic and subjective, that the client's autonomy and critical judgment should always prevail. And so the astrologer always is avoiding fatalism, fear-mongering, and medical or legal advice. They refer clients to appropriate professionals when needed. The Alpha generation and the future of astrological epistemology. The Alpha generation, raised with instant access to information and a native skepticism of authority, is poised to reshape astrology. They are less interested in rigid doctrine and more interested in personal experience, aesthetic resonance, and meme-able symbols. They are also the first generation to grow up with open discussion of NHI contact and exophysics. The faculty sees this generation as a vanguard of post-skeptical astrology, comfortable with ambiguity, unthreatened by critique, and interested in astrology as a language of the self rather than a claim to occult power. The Alpha astrologer says, "This is my chart. It helps me understand myself. I don't know if the planets cause anything, and I don't need to know." The NHI perspective. In a rare communication, let's offer this reflection on human astrology via an NHI. Your debate about whether astrology is true or false is touching, but it reveals your species' binary cognitive habit. In the galactic library, there are many maps of reality, each true at its own level. Your natal chart is one such map, a symbolic encoding of the soul's entry point into your local spacetime. It is not false because it is not physical. It is a different order of information. We do not ask whether a poem is true in the sense that a physics equation is true. We ask whether it is adequate, whether it reveals something of the mystery and guides the traveler. By that standard, your astrology is often remarkably adequate. Refine it. Do not discard it. Now onto our appendices. So Appendix A is just a quick glossary of our epistemological and our critical terms. So archetypal astrology is a model interpreting planets as universal psychic principles. Barnum effect, Forer effect, is a tendency to accept vague general descriptions as personally accurate. Confirmation bias is the tendency to favor information that confirms pre-existing beliefs. Demarcation problem is the philosophical question of distinguishing science from non-science. Falsifiability, Karl Popper's criterion that a scientific theory must make testable predictions that could prove it false. Hermeneutics, the theory and methodology of interpretation, especially of symbolic text. Post-skeptical astrology, an approach that integrates skeptical critiques into a reformed, self-aware practice. Synchronicity, Jung's concept of meaningful coincidence without causal connection. And yeah, that looks like that's actually it. So in my next video, let's see, I was gonna do that, but we're actually gonna do something else. Bear with me, guys. Going down my alien shit. It's gonna be worth it once I figure out what I'm gonna teach you next. I always, like to have new topics. I think we're gonna go over this occult astrology. Yeah. I'll see you there with peace and love.